Picture this. Napoleon Bonaparte, once the master of Europe, the man who reshaped an entire continent, stands at the edge of ruin. His Grande Armée, the pride of France, stumbles back through fields drenched in relentless rain. The mud clings to their boots, dragging them down as if the very earth is trying to swallow them whole. Above, the sky churns with ominous clouds, and the air feels heavy, electric, as though something unnatural hangs over the battlefield. The world seems to conspire against the emperor. But was this truly just bad weather? Or was there something far greater, far more sinister at work? Now imagine this. Halfway across the world, just 2 months earlier, Mount Tambora erupts in a cataclysmic explosion. The volcano unleashes a force so unimaginable that it changes the course of history. Entire villages are buried alive, the sky turns black for days, and the sound of the blast echoes thousands of miles away. But it wasn't just the immediate devastation that marked this event, it was the aftermath. Ash and sulfur dioxide are hurled into the atmosphere, spreading like an invisible veil across the globe. Temperatures plummet, crops fail, and a chain reaction of disasters begins. And yet, no one in Europe could have known what was happening so far away. Or could they? Consider this. Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo wasn't just a military collapse. His forces were delayed by torrential rain, his artillery, once his greatest strength, rendered useless in the mud. His soldiers, already weakened, marched into a swampy, unyielding battlefield. The conditions were so extreme, so precise, that they seemed almost unnatural. Could this have been connected to the eruption? Was the ash from Tambora's fury already swirling in the skies, altering the climate in ways no one could fully comprehend? And here's where the questions grow even darker. What if someone knew? What if this wasn't just a coincidence? Napoleon had many enemies, kings, coalitions, and shadowy groups that saw him as a threat to the old order. Could they have anticipated the fallout of the eruption, understanding the way it would destabilize the weather? Or, as some fringe theories suggest, could someone have even manipulated these forces, turning nature itself into a weapon? It sounds impossible, doesn't it? But history is filled with mysteries like this, moments where the natural world seems to intervene at critical junctures. And in Napoleon's case, the timing is too precise to ignore. The eruption of Tambora and the emperor's downfall are separated by just weeks. The rains that drowned his chances at victory? They came after decades of successful campaigns, as if the heavens themselves had finally decided to extinguish his flame. What if there's more to this story than we've been told? Napoleon himself believed in destiny, in the idea that his rise and fall were written in the stars. But what if it wasn't destiny? What if it was science, or power, or even conspiracy? This isn't just a tale of an emperor brought to his knees by misfortune. This is the story of how one of the most powerful men in history may have been defeated not just by armies, but by the forces of nature, and perhaps by something more. Something hidden in the ash of a distant volcano. Stay with us as we unravel the threads of this incredible connection, piecing together the legacy of Napoleon's fall and the secrets of Tambora's eruption. The answers may shake everything you thought you knew about history, and leave you wondering what other truths are still buried, waiting to be unearthed. Napoleon Bonaparte was no ordinary leader. By the early 19th century, he had risen from a relatively obscure Corsican officer to the ruler of nearly all Europe. His name struck fear into monarchs, inspired devotion among his soldiers, and reshaped the very fabric of the continent. Yet, by 1815, the man who once seemed invincible was watching his empire unravel. The cracks in Napoleon's reign began to show in 1812, during his disastrous invasion of Russia. What should have been his crowning achievement turned into a nightmare. His massive army, over 600,000 strong, was reduced to a fraction of its size as they marched through an unforgiving Russian winter. Bitter cold, starvation, and guerrilla attacks from Russian forces turned the Grande Armée into a shadow of its former self. By the time Napoleon limped back to France, the aura of his invincibility had shattered. Then came the defeats. In 1813, the Battle of Leipzig, known as the Battle of Nations, saw Napoleon's enemies unite to crush his forces. The coalition of Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia drove him back to Paris, forcing him to abdicate in 1814. Napoleon was exiled to the island of Elba, a remote outpost in the Mediterranean. For most men, this would have been the end. But Napoleon wasn't like most men. In 1815, he escaped Elba, returning to France in a daring gamble to reclaim his throne. His return sparked a wave of loyalty among his former soldiers and citizens. In a matter of weeks, he had rebuilt his army and seized power once again. For 100 days, it seemed as though the emperor might rewrite his destiny. But his enemies were waiting. The coalition moved quickly to crush him once and for all. It all came down to a single decisive battle, Waterloo. On June 18, 1815, Napoleon faced the Duke of Wellington's forces on a muddy battlefield in modern-day Belgium. But even before the battle began, things were going wrong. Torrential rains the night before turned the fields into a swamp. The mud delayed Napoleon's army, particularly his artillery, the very weapons that had helped him dominate Europe for years. His cannons couldn't fire with their usual precision, and his infantry slogged through the muck, exhausted before the fighting even began. It was as if the weather itself was conspiring against him. Napoleon had faced rain before, but this was different. Soldiers wrote of skies that seemed unnaturally dark, winds that chilled them to the bone. Some claimed the battlefield felt cursed, as though the forces of nature had turned against their once great leader. But was this simply a stroke of bad luck? Or could it have been something more? Here's the strange part. The rain that drowned Napoleon's hopes wasn't an isolated event. Across Europe in 1815, weather patterns were shifting in dramatic and unexplainable ways. Unseasonable storms, freezing temperatures, and ruined crops were reported from France to England. These anomalies began just weeks after Mount Tambora's eruption, an event that unleashed ash and gases into the atmosphere, altering global climate. Did Napoleon unknowingly march into the grip of a disaster set in motion by a volcano on the other side of the world? Was this unprecedented weather a freak occurrence, or was it part of a chain reaction triggered by Tambora's fury? Napoleon was a man who believed in signs and omens. He often saw the weather as a harbinger of fate, interpreting storms and celestial events as warnings or blessings. In the days leading up to Waterloo, did he sense that nature itself was turning against him? And if so, how could he have known that the forces at work stretched far beyond his understanding, shaped by an eruption he would never see or hear of? The rain, the mud, the crushing defeat, it all raises a haunting question. Was this truly a battle between men? Or was it a battle against forces far beyond their control? Forces unleashed by a volcano thousands of miles away, reshaping the fate of empires without anyone fully realizing it. The fall of Napoleon is often attributed to his ambition, his overreach, his human flaws. But what if his final defeat wasn't entirely his doing? What if it was orchestrated not just by human hands, but by a planet that seemed determined to dethrone the Emperor of Europe? Could the seeds of his downfall have been sown long before in the depths of a restless volcano? We're only beginning to uncover the deeper connection between Napoleon's final days and the catastrophic eruption that reshaped the world. There's more to this story than history books would have you believe. Thousands of miles from the muddy fields of Waterloo, a sleeping giant stirred beneath the Earth's surface. Mount Tambora, a volcano on the island of Sumbawa in modern-day Indonesia, had been silent for centuries. But in April of 1815, it erupted with a force so massive, so devastating, that it became the most powerful volcanic eruption in recorded history. Its impact would be felt across the globe, and perhaps on the fate of Napoleon Bonaparte himself. The explosion was apocalyptic. Entire villages vanished under rivers of molten lava. The blast ejected an unimaginable 38 cubic miles of ash and debris into the atmosphere, with some of it reaching heights of over 27 miles. The roar of the eruption was heard over 2,000 miles away, described by witnesses as the sound of cannon fire from the heavens. The skies turned black for days, as though the world itself had been plunged into night. But the true devastation came not from the immediate destruction, but from what Tambora unleashed into the atmosphere. Billions of tons of ash, sulfur dioxide, and other gases spread across the globe, forming a veil that blocked out the sun. Temperatures plummeted, crops failed, famine and disease spread like wildfire. The year following the eruption, 1816, became known as the Year Without a Summer. Snow fell in June, rivers froze in July, and the sun glowed a blood-red hue through the haze of volcanic particles. And yet, the full effects of the eruption began to take hold long before that notorious summer. Scientists now believe that the immediate aftermath of Tambora's explosion disrupted weather patterns almost instantly. Sudden and dramatic shifts in temperature and precipitation occurred in the weeks and months following April 1815. Unseasonable storms rolled across Europe, and torrential rains soaked the continent during the crucial months of Napoleon's final campaign. But here's the chilling part. No one at the time could have known the true cause of these events. To those living in Europe, the bizarre weather must have seemed like divine intervention, or perhaps a cruel twist of fate. After all, how could anyone in 1815 connect the downfall of an emperor in Belgium to a volcanic eruption on the other side of the planet? What if someone did know? This is where the conspiracy deepens. The eruption of Tambora, though an act of nature, was a known phenomenon to those who studied the Earth's forces. Even in the early 19th century, the scientific community was beginning to understand the link between volcanic eruptions and atmospheric changes. Could Napoleon's enemies, countries like Britain, Austria, and Prussia, have been aware of Tambora's eruption and its potential to disrupt Europe's climate? Could they have used this knowledge to their advantage, preparing their forces while nature weakened Napoleon's? Or, as some fringe theories suggest, could the eruption have been more than just a natural disaster? Was there an unseen hand guiding these events, manipulating or even anticipating the chaos that Tambora would unleash? It's not as far-fetched as it might seem. Throughout history, natural disasters have often been tied to prophecy, conspiracy, and hidden agendas. Ancient civilizations viewed volcanic eruptions as omens of change, warnings from the gods, or even acts of divine punishment. In 1815, as the old world order fought desperately to destroy Napoleon's empire, would they have seen Tambora as an opportunity, or perhaps a sign, that the emperor's time had come to an end? The timing is impossible to ignore. Tambora erupted in April 1815, just 2 months before the Battle of Waterloo. The rain that drenched Napoleon's army, the mud that crippled his artillery, the dark skies that seemed to mirror his crumbling fate. These were all part of a larger pattern of chaos unleashed by the volcano. And yet, the mystery doesn't end there. The ash and gases from Tambora didn't just cause storms and cooler temperatures. They also created strange, almost supernatural phenomena. Across Europe and North America, eyewitnesses reported eerie blood-red sunsets, glowing halos around the moon, and an unusual phantom fog that seemed to hang in the air for weeks. These sights were unlike anything people had seen before, adding an otherworldly dimension to the disasters of 1815. Could these eerie phenomena have added to the sense that Napoleon's reign was doomed, not just by men, but by the cosmos itself? What if Tambora wasn't just a volcano? What if it was a warning, a harbinger of change, or even a tool, one wielded by forces we have yet to fully understand? The eruption of Tambora is often remembered as a tragedy, a natural disaster that brought suffering to millions. But its timing, its effects, and its connection to one of history's greatest turning points raise questions that can't be ignored. Was this event a random act of nature, or was it part of a larger plan, a hidden link between the Earth's fury and the fall of an emperor? Could the fate of Napoleon Bonaparte have been decided not on the battlefield, but in the heart of a volcano? And if so, who or what was truly in control? The answers might challenge everything you thought you knew about the past. As the ash and gases from Mount Tambora spread through the stratosphere, the world began to feel its grip. The eruption's effects were unlike anything humanity had ever witnessed. Across the globe, temperatures dropped as sunlight struggled to penetrate the volcanic haze. This sudden cooling disrupted weather patterns, creating what historians now call the year without a summer. In Europe, the summer of 1816 was anything but warm. Snow fell in June, rivers froze in July, and crops withered under relentless cold and unseasonable storms. Farmers watched in despair as their fields, already waterlogged from weeks of rain, yielded little to nothing. Starvation loomed, and food riots broke out across the continent. In Switzerland, desperate villagers reportedly boiled grass and moss to survive. The same story played out in China, India, and North America, where failing harvests triggered widespread famine. But Tambora's reach wasn't just limited to climate and agriculture. The volcanic ash created eerie atmospheric effects, altering the very skies. Reports from Europe described blood-red sunsets that stretched across the horizon, casting an ominous glow over cities and villages. Strange phantom fogs were seen, thick and yellowish, blotting out the sun even during midday. The poet Lord Byron, inspired by this apocalyptic gloom, wrote his famous poem, Darkness, describing a world where the sun was extinguished and humanity descended into chaos. This was no ordinary disaster. It was a planetary crisis. But here's where things grow even more intriguing. Tambora's eruption occurred just 2 months before Napoleon's final stand at Waterloo. Could its effects have already begun altering Europe's weather? Scientists today suggest that while Tambora's full impact took months to peak, the massive ash cloud would have begun influencing the atmosphere almost immediately. Imagine Napoleon's campaign during this time. His army, already under immense pressure, faced not only human enemies, but also an environment turned hostile by forces they couldn't see or understand. The rain that soaked the battlefield at Waterloo, the unrelenting mud that immobilized his cannons, were these merely coincidental, or were they early manifestations of Tambora's wrath? What's more, the sudden climate anomalies would have hit Napoleon's supply chains hard. Starving populations across Europe meant dwindling resources for armies, reduced morale among soldiers, and a populace too preoccupied with survival to rally behind an emperor. Was Napoleon fighting against more than just an allied coalition? Was he unknowingly contending with the aftershocks of a volcano that had erupted thousands of miles away? It's here that the line between coincidence and conspiracy begins to blur. Was this simply a natural disaster with unfortunate timing, or was there a deeper layer of intent? Could Tambora's eruption have been exploited by Napoleon's enemies, rival nations that sought any advantage to ensure his downfall? And, as some whisper, could this event have even been foreseen or anticipated by those with secret knowledge of the natural world? We're only scratching the surface of this enigma. The timing, the interconnectedness, the eerie coincidences, they all point to a larger story, one that ties a volcanic eruption to the collapse of an emperor. But to truly understand how these events might have been manipulated, we must dig deeper into the hidden hands of history and the potential exploitation of nature's chaos. The next piece of the puzzle lies in the question, did anyone see this coming? And if they did, what did they do with that knowledge? What we uncover next could redefine how we view Napoleon's defeat and the forces that shaped it. What followed the eruption of Mount Tambora was unlike anything the world had seen or understood at the time. As the ash and sulfur dioxide spread through the stratosphere, they acted as a shroud, reflecting sunlight away from the Earth. Temperatures began to drop, triggering what scientists now call a volcanic winter. In the months after the eruption, strange and unsettling phenomena were reported across the globe. Crops failed as frost struck fields at unseasonable times. Rivers froze over in the middle of summer. Livestock perished, and with them, the livelihoods of countless farmers. By 1816, Europe and North America were gripped by what came to be known as the Year Without a Summer. In Switzerland, Mary Shelley, trapped indoors by relentless storms, began penning Frankenstein, a story born from the eerie gloom that blanketed Europe. In the United States, food riots erupted as hungry mobs ransacked stores and granaries. In China, torrential rains destroyed crops, leading to widespread famine. Across the globe, people looked to the heavens and saw ominous red skies at sunset, and otherworldly beauty masking the destruction unfolding below. But amidst this chaos, the timing of the volcanic winter in Europe raises a tantalizing question. Could Tambora's eruption have begun affecting weather patterns within weeks of its explosion? And if so, what role did this play in the rain-drenched battlefields of Napoleon's final campaign? At first glance, it might seem impossible for a volcanic eruption in Indonesia to impact events in Europe so quickly. But consider the evidence. Volcanic particles spread faster than the naked eye can perceive. The stratosphere, where Tambora's debris lingered, serves as a global highway for winds, carrying ash and gases thousands of miles within days. And the more we learn about the atmospheric disruptions caused by eruptions, the clearer it becomes that Tambora's reach extended far beyond its immediate surroundings. By June of 1815, Europe was already experiencing strange weather patterns. The rains that delayed Napoleon's attack at Waterloo were unusually heavy, even by the region's standards. Soldiers trudged through mud so thick it stalled artillery and sapped morale. The ground was so waterlogged that cannonballs, which should have ricocheted through enemy lines, sank uselessly into the earth. Could this be coincidence? Perhaps, but coincidences often make the perfect cover for deeper truths. What makes Tambora's eruption even more intriguing is how little its effects were understood at the time. To Napoleon and his contemporaries, the bizarre weather must have seemed like an act of God, or a cruel twist of fate. Yet modern science reveals that the skies themselves were altered by Tambora's fury, creating conditions that reshaped the course of history. And this is where the story takes a conspiratorial turn. If the eruption's effects were already disrupting weather across Europe, could anyone have anticipated it? Did rival powers, Britain, Prussia, Austria, notice the changes in the climate and use them to their advantage? Could the timing of Tambora's eruption and Napoleon's downfall be more than a historical coincidence? Some have even speculated that certain groups, with access to early meteorological observations, might have seen the eruption as an opportunity. Britain, for example, had a burgeoning scientific community studying weather patterns. Could they have recognized the telltale signs of a volcanic winter? And if so, did they exploit this knowledge to strike Napoleon at his most vulnerable moment? The timing is almost too perfect. A volcanic eruption on the far side of the world, a year without a summer, and an emperor's defeat, all intertwined in a chain of events that defies easy explanation. What did Napoleon's enemies know, and how far might they have gone to ensure that his reign ended in disaster? We're only beginning to scratch the surface of this mystery. The connection between Tambora's eruption and Napoleon's downfall is both startling and profound. But as we dig deeper, we'll uncover even more evidence that suggests the natural world wasn't just a backdrop to history, it was an active participant. Could Tambora's eruption have been the hidden hand guiding one of the most pivotal moments in human history? If nature itself played a role in Napoleon's fall, was it truly random? Or could unseen forces, human or otherwise, have anticipated the chaos and acted accordingly? History is riddled with whispers of secret societies, hidden agendas, and knowledge far beyond its time. Could the eruption of Tambora and Napoleon's downfall be part of a grander, more sinister plan? Let's start with what we know. By the early 19th century, science was advancing rapidly. Meteorology was in its infancy, but the study of weather patterns, atmospheric phenomena, and celestial events was gaining traction, particularly in Britain and Austria, two of Napoleon's fiercest enemies. These nations had access to early forms of weather data, recorded meticulously by military and naval officers. Some even dabbled in what could be called proto-climatology, observing long-term shifts in weather and their effects on warfare. Now imagine this. Tambora's eruption in April 1815 sends shockwaves across the globe. Reports of strange weather begin trickling in, delayed harvests, unseasonable storms, and blood-red sunsets. Could it be possible that someone, somewhere, connected the dots? Could rival powers, desperate to crush Napoleon for good, have recognized the signs of a volcanic winter and strategized accordingly? It's no secret that Britain's intelligence networks were among the most advanced in the world at the time. They had spies in every corner of Europe, intercepting communications, studying troop movements, and, perhaps, even monitoring the skies. Some believe that early meteorological observations, coupled with the strange atmospheric effects seen after Tambora, gave Napoleon's enemies an unexpected advantage. Could they have predicted that heavy rains would stall his final campaign, buying them the precious time they needed to converge on him at Waterloo? But what if this wasn't just science? What if it went deeper? Throughout history, secret societies like the Freemasons and the Illuminati have been accused of orchestrating events behind the scenes, manipulating kings and emperors to serve their own shadowy agendas. Napoleon himself had a complicated relationship with the Freemasons, banning their lodges at times and allowing them to operate at others. Could these secretive groups have played a role in his downfall? Could they have interpreted Tambora's eruption as a divine sign, or even as an opportunity to reshape the balance of power in Europe? There are cryptic accounts from this time, letters and journals that hint at unusual knowledge of the weather. Some even refer to the strange skies over Europe as the heavens speaking. Could these references be evidence of an elite few who understood the catastrophic impact of Tambora and sought to use it as a weapon against Napoleon? And then there's the man himself. Napoleon was deeply superstitious, often consulting astrologers and interpreting celestial phenomena as omens. He believed in his destiny, that he was chosen by fate to rule. But what if the forces conspiring against him were not celestial but earthly? What if, as he prepared for Waterloo, he suspected that the storms were more than a coincidence? Did he ever suspect that the very skies might have been turned against him? It's not just secret societies and rival nations that make this story so compelling. It's the sheer scope of the conspiracy. Volcanic eruptions have long been viewed as omens of change or divine punishment. Ancient civilizations believed that when a mountain exploded, it was a sign that the gods were angry, that the natural order was about to shift. Could Tambora's eruption, one of the most violent in history, have been seen as a signal to act? And what if some fringe theories are correct? What if the eruption itself wasn't entirely natural? Some speculate, wildly perhaps, that the timing was too precise, that Tambora's explosion could have been triggered by unknown means. It's a tantalizing idea, albeit one without hard evidence. But in a story as mysterious as this, no possibility can be dismissed outright. Napoleon's final days are shrouded in questions. Was his defeat simply the result of human error and military miscalculation? Or was it the culmination of forces beyond his control, orchestrated by nature, and perhaps by those who sought to wield its power? The evidence is mounting, but there are still more secrets to uncover. As we delve deeper into the connections between Tambora's eruption and Napoleon's fall, we'll explore the buried records, the missing testimonies, and the scientific discoveries that continue to shed light on this extraordinary chapter of history. The truth, as always, lies in the details. History has a way of leaving behind breadcrumbs, subtle traces of truth buried beneath the surface. When it comes to the connection between Mount Tambora's eruption and Napoleon's fall, the evidence isn't just compelling, it's haunting. From missing records to modern scientific breakthroughs, the clues point to a hidden narrative that reshaped the fate of empires. But why has so much of this story remained untold? What secrets are still locked away in the ash and mud of 1815? Let's begin with the weather itself. Scientists today can reconstruct historical climate patterns with astonishing precision using ice cores and tree rings. In these natural time capsules, we find traces of Tambora's fury. Sulfur deposits in ice layers from Greenland to Antarctica confirm a massive release of volcanic gases in 1815. Tree rings from that year reveal stunted growth, evidence of a planet plunged into sudden and severe cooling. But here's where it gets interesting. Meteorological data from Europe during 1815 and 1816 shows an unprecedented series of heavy rains, unseasonable frosts, and atmospheric disruptions. The skies over Europe were described as murky and veiled, and accounts from civilians and soldiers alike spoke of a strange, oppressive gloom. One British officer wrote of a battlefield that seemed more swamp than earth, as if the heavens themselves wept for the blood to be spilled. Yet, in the archives of Napoleon's enemies, there are curious gaps. Weather records from 1815, particularly those from military outposts and supply routes, are conspicuously incomplete. Was this an innocent oversight, or were these records deliberately erased to obscure the full extent of what was known at the time? And then there are the eyewitness accounts. Soldiers from Napoleon's army described rain that seemed almost otherworldly, falling in unrelenting sheets that turned roads into rivers and fields into quicksand. Civilians wrote of an eerie stillness between storms, as if the natural world itself were holding its breath. These descriptions align eerily well with the documented effects of volcanic ash in the atmosphere, effects scientists only began to understand centuries later. But the most perplexing pieces of evidence lie in what has been suppressed or conveniently forgotten. Take, for example, reports of unusual illnesses sweeping through Europe in 1815 and 1816. Fever, respiratory problems, and strange skin conditions plagued both soldiers and civilians. Modern analysis suggests these symptoms could be linked to fine ash particles from Tambora, carried invisibly across continents. Yet these outbreaks were downplayed in official records. Why? Even more puzzling are the missing correspondences. Letters between key European leaders during the critical months of Napoleon's final campaign have vanished from archives, leaving gaps in the historical record. What were they discussing? Could they have been sharing information about the strange weather, or even planning how to exploit it? The absence of these documents raises uncomfortable questions about what was known and by whom. Fast forward to today, and modern science is uncovering even more tantalizing connections. Ice core analysis has revealed a spike in atmospheric sulfur levels during 1815, consistent with the eruption of Tambora. Soil samples from Europe show traces of volcanic ash, suggesting that the eruption's reach was far more immediate than previously believed. But what's even more fascinating is the growing body of evidence linking volcanic eruptions to shifts in geopolitical power. Throughout history, major eruptions have coincided with pivotal moments: the fall of the Roman Republic, the collapse of the Mayan civilization, and now perhaps the defeat of Napoleon. Could this be mere coincidence, or does it suggest a pattern, a hidden rhythm to history shaped by the Earth itself? And then there's the question of human involvement. Some historians believe that rival nations, particularly Britain, might have conducted early experiments in atmospheric observation. Could they have recognized Tambora's eruption as an opportunity, using its effects to undermine Napoleon's campaigns? It's a provocative idea, but one that aligns with Britain's reputation for leveraging any advantage, no matter how unconventional. The missing records, the suppressed testimonies, the modern discoveries, they all point to the same unsettling conclusion: that the story of Napoleon's fall and Tambora's eruption is far more complex than we've been led to believe. What other secrets lie buried in the ash and shadows of 1815, waiting to be unearthed? We're approaching the heart of the mystery, but there's still more to uncover. The forces that brought down Napoleon were vast, spanning continents and defying comprehension. For all its intrigue, the connection between Mount Tambora's eruption and Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo remains, to many, a stretch of the imagination. Historians and scientists alike have raised doubts, arguing that the timing of the eruption and its supposed impact on European weather is purely coincidental. But are these counterarguments truly dismissive of the link, or do they overlook critical pieces of the puzzle? Skeptics often point to the nature of atmospheric effects, suggesting that Tambora's eruption would have taken longer to influence weather patterns in Europe. The volcanic aerosols, they argue, would not have reached sufficient concentrations to affect the climate until later in 1815, making a direct impact on the rain-soaked battlefield of Waterloo unlikely. Meteorologists argue that weather anomalies in the months following the eruption could just as easily have been the result of natural variability rather than the eruption itself. Historians, too, have their doubts. They attribute Napoleon's defeat to his own strategic missteps, the brilliance of the Duke of Wellington, and the coordinated efforts of the Allied forces. To them, the torrential rain and muddy terrain are nothing more than unfortunate circumstances, an unlucky turn of fate in a campaign that had already begun to falter. Yet, even as these counter-arguments mount, they fail to explain the peculiar timing of Tambora's eruption and the cascading disasters that followed. Could it really be a mere coincidence that the most powerful volcanic eruption in recorded history coincided with the collapse of one of history's greatest empires? Or are skeptics dismissing the possibility because it challenges the conventional narratives of Napoleon's defeat? Moreover, some dismiss the conspiratorial undertones as implausible, questioning whether early meteorological observations were advanced enough to predict or exploit Tambora's effects. They argue that while rival powers like Britain and Prussia may have studied weather patterns, the idea that they could have used this knowledge as a strategic weapon against Napoleon is, at best, speculative. But here's where the skeptics falter. History has repeatedly shown that seemingly impossible connections often prove true when examined closely. From secret alliances to covert intelligence networks, the idea that hidden knowledge shaped Napoleon's fall is not as far-fetched as it might first appear. Dismissing the possibility outright may be an unwillingness to confront the uncomfortable reality that natural forces, and perhaps human manipulation of those forces, played a role in reshaping the course of history. So, where does this leave us? Between the skeptics' rational explanations and the tantalizing possibilities of a deeper connection lies a vast middle ground. To dismiss the impact of Tambora's eruption entirely is to ignore the growing body of evidence that points to its far-reaching effects. But to claim certainty about its role in Napoleon's downfall is equally premature. The truth, as always, is likely more nuanced and more intriguing than either side is willing to admit. As we near the conclusion of this exploration, one question remains. What does the story of Tambora and Napoleon teach us about the fragile interplay between humanity and nature? And could this hidden chapter of history hold lessons that resonate far beyond the battlefield of Waterloo? The story of Napoleon's downfall and Mount Tambora's eruption is more than just a tale of coincidence or conjecture. It's a profound reminder of how interconnected our world truly is. The fate of an emperor, the chaos of war, and the fury of nature collided in ways no one at the time could fully comprehend. But as we've unraveled this mystery, one question lingers. How much of history is shaped by forces we cannot control, or even understand? Napoleon believed in destiny. To him, his rise and fall were written in the stars, dictated by a higher power. Yet his defeat at Waterloo raises a haunting possibility. What if his fate was shaped not by divine will, but by a volcanic eruption on the other side of the world? Could an event so seemingly distant, a mountain exploding in Indonesia, truly have sent ripples through time and space to topple an empire? The evidence is compelling. From the torrential rains that bogged down Napoleon's troops to the broader climate disruptions across Europe, the fingerprints of Tambora's eruption are everywhere. But what remains unclear is whether this connection was purely natural or something more. Were these events simply the result of chance, or were they exploited by those who understood the chaos Tambora had unleashed? Did rival powers, secret societies, or unseen forces use this catastrophe as an opportunity to reshape the balance of power in Europe? History, after all, is rarely as straightforward as it seems. For every battle fought and every treaty signed, there are unseen factors, hidden hands, natural forces, and coincidences too precise to ignore, that shape the outcomes we take for granted. Napoleon's fall and Tambora's eruption may be just one example of this, a glimpse into the intricate web of connections that bind human events to the natural world. But the story doesn't end here. Tambora's legacy didn't just influence Napoleon's downfall. It set off a chain reaction that reshaped the 19th century. The year without a summer led to famine, migrations, and revolutions. It changed art, literature, and science, leaving a lasting imprint on the world. And yet, much of this remains buried, hidden in the archives, in ice cores, and in the memories of those who lived through it. So, what do we take away from this? Perhaps it's a reminder of our own fragility in the face of nature's power. Perhaps it's a call to question the stories we've been told, to look deeper for the truths that lie beneath the surface. Or perhaps it's simply an invitation to wonder, to imagine how the unseen forces of the past continue to shape our world today. The secrets of the earth, the hidden hands of power, and the unpredictable forces of nature, they are as relevant now as they were in 1815. What other stories remain buried, waiting to be unearthed? What other connections have we yet to discover?